Hey guys, welcome back to Fantasy Tipped. Julian here for a very important episode of this preseason. This is the episode that I break down the NHL schedule and tell you what teams have a favorable and what teams have a less favorable fantasy schedule. We're going to be going through things like back-to-back sets, teams with the most off nights, and more. We're even going to look at playoff schedules to see which team has the best fantasy playoff schedule and which team has the worst. Before we jump into today's video, guys, drop a like and hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. A lot of you that watch this channel still aren't subscribed, so I really would appreciate that. It's absolutely free. And if you do want to take that support to the next level, you can check out the link to my Patreon down below. If you do decide to take your support to the next level, joining my Patreon will unlock you the ability to join my Fantasy Tipped Members League and play fantasy hockey against me and Max. That's pretty cool. You also unlock my full rankings coming in a few days, and then you also unlock things like early access videos, as well as being able to DM with me one-on-one, ask me any fantasy hockey questions you have whenever you want. Enough about that now, guys, and let's jump right into the content, and let's take a look at back-to-back games by team. Now, this is a graph that I made based on which teams have the most back-to-backs and what teams have the least. As you can see here, Los Angeles, Montreal, the New York Islanders, Pittsburgh, and San Jose have the most back-to-back sets with 16. Why is this significant? Well, that means their goalies are probably not going to start at the very least 16 games, because usually when a team has a back-to-back set, by default they're starting their backup goalie on one of the games of that back-to-back set. That's not to say that's the only time the backup goalie is going to play. It just means that the backup goalie is probably going to get more starts than maybe some other teams. Although in Montreal, Sam Montembeault might get almost every other start besides those back-to-backs, so I'm still not too worried about drafting Sam Montembeault despite this. Same thing with the Islanders and the LA Kings, honestly, as well. The teams with the least amount of back-to-backs are Calgary and Winnipeg, and that means that they're going to be running their goalies Hellebuck and Dustin Wolf a lot, which was already expected. And they might even get more starts than they did last year, which is absolutely crazy, but definitely possible given the little amount of back-to-backs that their teams have. Let's take a look at teams with the most and least off nights now. Now, for off days, I didn't just do what a lazy person would do and check how many Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and Sunday games that teams played throughout the year, because that would end up being inaccurate, since not all Monday, Wednesday, Fridays, and Sundays are necessarily off days for hockey. And sometimes days of the week, like a Tuesday or a Thursday, or even a Saturday on rare occasions, can be an off night. An off night just means that there are 7 or less games that night, which means less than half the teams in the NHL are playing. So if you take a look at the teams that play the most when less than half the NHL is playing, that is the Anaheim Ducks on top, as they are every single year with 33 games on off nights, followed shortly by Utah with 31, Chicago with 29, St. Louis with 28, and Washington also with 28, and notably New Jersey and the New York Rangers at 27 as well. So those teams have pretty good amount of off-day games, which is great. At the end of the list, you have Nashville with the least amount of off-night games, with only 15 games on off nights. So really not the most ideal teams to be drafting from if you're looking to play their players on off days. Obviously, don't not draft a guy like Philip Forsberg because you're like, oh my God, he doesn't have a lot of off days. No, when you're drafting your studs, you don't factor that in. It's only when you're filling out the rest of your team. Other teams that don't have the most ideal schedule for off days are Montreal, Dallas, and Boston with 16, 16, and 17 off days only. Now, because off nights are off days doesn't necessarily tell the right story or the most accurate story of who's actually going to fit into your lineup, I looked at teams that play on nights with 11 or more games. Usually when there are 11 or more games in a night, that's when you can no longer fit a player from that team in your lineup. So this graph is going to be a little bit more accurate to what you can actually end up fitting in your lineup, at least for most of you. Unless you're in a league that really doesn't have a lot of spots to fill in for your roster and a big bench, this is probably going to be pretty accurate. Now, Nashville, once again, is the worst with 43 games played on nights where 11 or more teams are playing, which is really, really bad. That's more than half their games. Montreal and Ottawa as well aren't great. Philly, San Jose, Columbus, Edmonton, Boston, 40 games. Not the best either, but not horrible. But really the teams that are the best are Anaheim, as we expected, but also Chicago and Washington are also tied for only 31 games played on those super busy nights. So in my opinion, Chicago and Washington's schedule is pretty much just as good as Anaheim. So drafting players from any of those teams is going to be favorable schedule-wise. And honorable shout out to Utah as well, who only play 32 games on those super busy nights. All right, so next is playoff schedules. And the playoff this year, for most of you, it should be starting in week 21. That would be your quarterfinals. Then week 22 would be your semifinals. And week 23 will be your finals. For some of you, your quarterfinals will start on week 22. Your semifinals will be on week 23. And then your finals will be on week 24, which is a double week. It's a full 7-day week plus another 4 days. Now, I never, ever recommend to do this format because towards the end of the season, good teams that are already in playoff spots kind of start benching their star players. When this happens, it makes your finals super anticlimactic and it just sucks for everybody. So, I always suggest not playing in the last week of fantasy. That being said, I still put out content for that last week for you guys. So don't worry if you do decide to play those weeks. I just personally do not recommend it and I don't like it at all. So for week 21, the team with the least amount of games played is the St. Louis Blues, only playing 2 games, which is not ideal for your fantasy playoffs. Teams with 4 games: Boston, Buffalo, Calgary, Carolina, Chicago, Colorado, Columbus, Dallas, LA, Nashville, New York Islanders, New York Rangers, Pittsburgh, Tampa Bay, Utah, Vegas, and Winnipeg. Not too bad. A lot of teams playing 4 games that week. For week 22, teams that play 2 games, there are none. Every team plays 3 games or more, so you don't have to worry too much about week 22. But the teams that do play 4 games are Boston, Chicago, Columbus, Dallas, Florida, Montreal, Nashville, New Jersey, New York Rangers, Ottawa, Philadelphia, and Tampa Bay. For week 23, there are 2 teams that unfortunately play only 2 games. Those are Nashville and Utah. But there is a team that actually plays 5 games, and that's the Pittsburgh Penguins, making them super valuable for your fantasy finals. Anaheim, Boston, Carolina, Colorado, Detroit, Florida, Montreal, New Jersey, New York Islanders, New York Rangers, Ottawa, Philadelphia, San Jose, St. Louis, Vancouver, and Washington also have a pretty good fantasy final schedule with 4 games apiece. So what does this all mean? Well, that means that the best schedule in the fantasy playoffs, if your playoffs are week 21 to 23, are Boston, Carolina, the New York Rangers, and Pittsburgh. These teams have 12 total games over the course of the fantasy playoffs. The teams with the worst schedule, Edmonton, Minnesota, Seattle, St. Louis, Toronto, and Utah, only have 9 total games over the course of the fantasy playoffs, which is an average of 3 per week, which isn't horrendous, but it's definitely not that great considering that the other 4 teams up there average 4 games per week, which could really make a big difference if you have a lot of players from these teams on your roster. If you're playing till week 24, there are 4 teams that really don't have the best schedule. Over the course of the double week, the Islanders, the Rangers, Pittsburgh, and Washington only play 4 games. And then there are 2 teams that play 7 games, San Jose and Seattle. So those teams are very valuable in your fantasy finals if you do finish in week 24. What does this all mean? Well, if your fantasy playoffs are between week 22 and week 24, the team with the best schedule is the San Jose Sharks that play 13 total games. Whereas the teams with the worst schedule are Buffalo, Edmonton, Minnesota, New York Islanders, Toronto, Utah, Vegas, and Washington that only have 11 total games. But the discrepancy between the best schedule and the worst schedule is only 2 games. So it's really not the end of the world if you have even quite a few players from the team with the worst schedule, because it's not that big of a difference. The only thing to note, guys, is when you're drafting, I wouldn't be drafting players based on this playoff schedule. It's something that's good to know, but you actually have to get to the fantasy playoffs before you start worrying about playoff schedule. So even if you draft a team that has a lot of players with the quote-unquote worst schedule, that doesn't matter. You can make moves, you can make trades. You're going to be making plenty of ads throughout the season. Get yourself to the playoffs first, and once you're locked in, then you can start looking at maybe acquiring guys that can, make your fantasy playoff runs more optimal, like a San Jose Shark in this case. And that's it for this video, guys. If you have any comments, drop them down below. I'll definitely make sure to answer as many as I can. And make sure to leave a like and hit that subscribe button on this video, guys. And I'll catch you all in the next episode of Fantasy Tips.